The river cut through the canyon like a blade of glass, cold and bright beneath the sinking sun, and when she rose from it, she did so with the quiet certainty of someone who believed the world had finally granted her a private moment, water streaming from her hair and dress as if the river itself were reluctant to let her go, her bare feet sinking into the pebbled bank while the canyon walls burned amber and gold. She had walked for days to reach this bend, following a rumor carried by frightened whispers and broken maps, and the water had been a promise, wash away the dust, the blood, the fear. So she stepped into it without looking back, unaware that fate had already placed a witness at the edge of her solitude. The cowboy stood knee-deep downstream, hat pulled low, coat heavy with river mist, his eyes trained on the current as if he were listening to it speak. And when he finally looked up, the shock hit him like a gunshot. He froze, breath caught in his throat. Because the woman before him was not a ghost or a trick of light, but painfully real, hair dark against pale shoulders, eyes wide with the same startled disbelief now reflected back at him. Time stretched, the river murmured, and neither moved, because in the west there were moments when motion invited death. She was the first to find her voice, though it came out thin and raw, asking who he was and why he was there, her hand instinctively tightening at her waist, as if a weapon might appear from the water. And he answered slowly, carefully, giving his name, Elias Crow, like a man offering proof of life, explaining that he was tracking stolen horses and had followed their prints to the river, never expecting to find a woman rising from it, like a confession he hadn't prepared to hear. She told him her name was Mara, and in the way she said it there was a history she didn't intend to share, a tremor of something hunted. And when she asked if he planned to turn her in, he realized how deep the fear ran, how many. Nights she had slept with danger breathing down her neck. Elias shook his head, lifting his hands to show they were empty, the revolver still holstered, because he understood that fear too well. He had once been the man chased through ravines for crimes he hadn't committed, and the scars along his ribs were proof that innocence didn't always keep you alive. The canyon seemed to lean closer, the sun dipping lower, and Elias noticed the bruises on Mara's arms, the way her dress clung and tore, the silent arithmetic of survival written across her skin, and something old and bitter stirred in him, a memory of the town that pretended righteousness while feeding on the weak. He told her she was safe for the moment, that he wasn't law and wasn't looking to be, and she laughed once, sharply, because safety had become a word she no longer trusted, yet she stayed where she was, rooted by exhaustion and the simple fact that running had given her nothing but more running. Elias offered his coat, tossing it onto a rock so she wouldn't mistake the gesture for a trap, and she hesitated only a second before taking it, the fabric heavy and warm around her shoulders, the scent of leather and smoke grounding her in the present. As she dressed, she spoke in fragments, telling him she had come from Red Hollow, a town that smiled with its teeth bared, where a preacher with clean hands and dirty ledgers sold protection like salvation, where women who asked questions vanished into the desert, and as the words spilled out, Elias felt the canyon narrow, the past and present colliding in a way that made his jaw tighten. He had heard of Red Hollow, had ridden past it without stopping, sensing rot beneath the paint, and now that rot had followed him here in the shape of a woman who looked like she'd walked out of the river to demand an answer from the world. He asked what she wanted now, where she planned to go, and she stared at the water as if it might answer for her, admitting she didn't. No, that she had only known she couldn't stay, and that sometimes leaving was the only plan a person could afford. Elias nodded because the West had taught him the same lesson, and he offered to walk her as far as the trail fork at dawn. No promises beyond that, no lies dressed up as hope, and she studied him with a careful measuring gaze, weighing the risk of trust against the certainty of solitude. Somewhere upstream a stone shifted, and both turned, hands moving by instinct, the silence snapping tight. Elias's eyes narrowed, scanning the brush, and Mara felt the old terror rise again. the sense that the river had only delayed what was coming. But when the sound faded into nothing, Elias let out a breath and told her they should make camp before dark, because night in the canyon belonged to things that didn't ask permission. They moved together then, an uneasy alliance forged in shock and necessity, gathering driftwood, sharing a small fire that painted their faces in flickering light. And as the stars came out, Mara found herself talking more than she intended, telling him about the ledger she had stolen from the preacher's office, about the names and payments that proved the town's righteousness was bought with suffering. And Elias listened with the stillness of a man who understood the weight of such knowledge, the way truth could be both shield and target. He told her that men would come looking, that the river would not hide her forever, and she said she knew that she hadn't come this far to turn back. And when she asked why he cared, he stared into the fire and admitted that once someone had watched him drown and done nothing, and he had promised himself he would never be that man again. The night deepened, a fire burned low, and in the space between them something fragile took shape, not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. And as Mara finally slept, wrapped in Elias's coat, he kept watch over the canyon, aware that the moment she had risen from the water, thinking she was alone, both their lives had already changed, and whatever waited beyond dawn would not be simple, would not be kind, but would be faced together whether either of them had planned it or not. Dawn crept into the canyon like a cautious witness, pale light sliding over stone and water as Elias rose before the birds, his body already tense with the knowledge that night had only delayed what the day would demand. And when Mara woke, she did so with a sharp intake of breath, memory rushing back the moment she saw the river and the cowboy sitting nearby, hat low, watching the bend in the trail as if expecting it to betray them at any second. They spoke little while breaking camp, because some truths didn't need words, and when they set out together along the narrow path, Elias warned her again that men from Red Hollow would not stop hunting the ledger she carried, that the preacher's reach extended farther than sermons and smiles, and Mara answered that she would rather die, running, than live silent, her fingers tightening around the oilskin-wrapped book hidden beneath her clothes. By mid-morning, the canyon opened into scrubland, heat rising fast, and it was there they heard the riders, distant at first, then unmistakable, hooves drumming like a verdict, and Elias cursed under his breath, pulling Mara off the trail just as three men crested the ridge, their eyes sharp, their guns worn with use, the kind of men who didn't ask questions because they were paid not to. They waited until the riders passed, dust hanging in the air, and when Mara's breath finally steadied, Elias made a decision he hadn't planned to make, telling her they weren't heading for the fork anymore, but for his old homestead in the hills, a place forgotten by maps where they could think, plan, and choose their next move instead of letting fear choose for them. The ride there was hard, silent miles under a merciless sun, but when the cabin finally appeared, weathered, leaning stubbornly, standing, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the fragile outline of hope. Inside, Elias lit the stove, shared the last of his coffee, and for the first time Mara laid the ledger on the table, opening it to reveal names that made Elias's jaw clench, town officials, businessmen, even a judge, proof that Red Hollow's rot ran deep, and Elias realized then that running would never be enough, that the only way out was through. He told her about the marshal in Stone Creek, a hard man but an honest one, and proposed a plan that bordered on suicide. They would take the ledger there, expose the preacher and everyone tied to him, and face whatever came after together. Mara hesitated, fear warring with resolve, because trust had cost her everything once before. But when gunfire cracked outside and a bullet tore through the cabin wall, the choice was made for them. They fled out the back as the hunters closed in, Elias returning fire just long enough to buy time, leading Mara through a ravine he knew like memory itself, and when they reached Stone Creek at dusk they were bloodied, exhausted but alive, slamming the marshal's door with riders already spilling into the street. What followed was chaos, shouts, drawn guns. The ledger slapped onto the desk like a challenge, and for one terrible moment Mara thought the system would swallow them whole. But the marshal read, his face hardening with every page, and when he finally looked up, he ordered the arrests that Red Hollow had believed impossible. The preacher was dragged from his pulpit before nightfall, the town's mask torn away in the lamplight, and as chains closed around guilty wrists, Mara felt years of fear loosen their grip, tears cutting clean lines through dust on her face. Days later, when the dust settled and the danger passed, she stood again by water, this time a quiet creek near Stone Creek, no longer alone, Elias beside her, the future uncertain but honest, and she understood that sometimes survival wasn't just about escaping darkness, but dragging it into the light. If this story held you, if you felt the tension, the courage, and the cost of truth in the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.